but it also allows other world leaders to play a man like that, because his negotiating playbook, his tactics are quite easy to understand, and over a period of time leaders get the hang of it. I heard Christian Lagarde say Europe needs to carry checkbooks when they're talking to Donald Trump. So that's as far as Europe is concerned, they're friends. But Russia, China, adversaries with a very different kind of equation. Do you fear they could play Trump?
Yeah, look, so you know, flatter him, announce big deals. You might have seen in the last couple of days there was this big deal announced about a $100 billion data center. So if you read through the lines, and Elon Musk has pointed this out, it's actually a $10 billion investment. SoftBank is putting in $5 billion, Oracle is $5 billion, and then they say they're going to raise more, and I'm sure they will. But money in the bank right now seems to be 10. It's very Trumpian to announce 100, and then to say it's going to be 500. And now that's just thin air. But he likes that, you know, so everyone plays to that and says we'll come up with the biggest number we can, and we'll announce it. And you know and the other funny thing about this was, so they announced the deal, and then outside they asked Larry Ellison of Oracle, so is the deal when is it going to happen? And he says, well, it only could have happened because of President Trump. And they say, yeah, but when is it going to happen? He said, construction began 6 months ago. So it can only happen because of him, but it already began last year.
But Trump is demonstrating two very different instincts. One, he wants to pull America away from the rest of the world and just look inwards. On the other, he says, I want to be the peacemaker. I want to end wars. Are those two instincts at odds with each other in your view? And it seems a lot of people seem to think he wants the Nobel Prize for peace. Could he get it in this term?
I think you're right that those are both they're at odds. And I think the reality is there again, he's a very skillful politician. He knows that's what his constituency, his base wants to hear. It's a nationalist, working class base that thinks America has worried too much about the world and worried too much about all these wars and peace, and why aren't we, fixing the problems at home? So that's the rhetoric. But as you say, he also, clearly likes the idea of being the leader of the free world, likes the idea of being the most powerful leader in the world, and wants to use that in a way that, helps the world, but also helps him personally, which gets us to the Nobel Prize. Look, if the United States has enormous political leverage now, I think in some ways it has more leverage now than it's had for decades, just because China is not doing so well. Russia is obviously very much on the back foot. Iran has been weakened. So its adversaries are all weakened. And by the way, Joe Biden should get some credit for that. But because of that, if the President of the United States puts a certain amount of time, energy, attention, yes, he might well be able to deliver results. I think on the crucial one, Ukraine, Donald Trump has begun to realize, and you see this in his last few tweets and statements, that the problem he faces in getting peace in Ukraine is not with Ukraine, but with Russia. It's Putin is the guy who's not willing to negotiate.
Can he browbeat Vladimir Putin? I saw the post he put out on Truth Social. It's surreal. You won't imagine that the sitting president of the United States is virtually threatening Putin.
Yeah.
You have a good understanding of Putin's mind. What do you think is the thinking in Russia at this moment? Do they just want this war to drag on and tire the West out? Does Putin think he can win? Can Trump force him into some kind of a peace deal?
So Putin, whom I've met several times, absolutely thinks he can win. Putin is a very disciplined person. He's very intelligent. He's very well briefed. He understands his version of Russian history very well. And for him, that version says, when Russia stays the course, suffers the pain, is willing to take the body blows, and is willing to keep going, it can outlast anyone. It outlasted Napoleon. It outlasted Hitler. That's his model, that the West is feckless. There's going to be infighting among democracies. They'll lose faith. They will not have the ability to have that kind of staying power. He does. And inexorably, slowly, he will grind the Ukrainians down. I think it is the challenge of the democracies to show that that's not true. And in fact, historically, the United States says, it outlasted Hitler's Germany, it outlasted Stalin's Soviet Union, it outlasted Al-Qaeda. But this is always the danger with democracies. So what I think Trump has to realize is that it's all very well to talk about being a deal maker, but in order to be a deal maker, you first need to put enough pressure on Putin that he feels he needs to make a deal. Right now, I don't think Putin thinks he needs to make a deal. He feels that as long as he keeps pushing forward, events will move in his direction. You can only make a deal if Putin thinks he's not winning on the battlefield, and he's not winning.
But Trump doesn't want to supply weapons and money to Zelensky. That just ensures that Putin then has the upper hand.
This is the problem.
So how can he win and not put down the money?
I think he'll find that, tariffs, as I say, against Russia, it's meaningless. Russia is already sanctioned. There is no Russian exports coming out. The thing that matters most to Putin is defeat on the battlefield. And the only way you can achieve that defeat on the battlefield is more military weaponry to Ukraine. The Ukrainians are willing to die for their country. They just need the weapons.
So what do you see happen? Because first it was, before I come to power, then it seemed to become 100 days. Will anything happen within these 100 days between Russia and Ukraine that Donald Trump is trying to ensure? Because he's also an egoistic man. I mean, the more Putin pushes back, the more his ego gets enraged.
I think Putin knows that. And so the question I have here is, Putin is not going to be simply defiant. He's going to try to do something. He's going to very much try to get that meeting with Donald Trump. I think that that's a mistake. The meeting with Putin should be a reward for some Russian concessions. You shouldn't straight away meet with Putin. Putin has been an outcast. He has been a pariah. Very few people are meeting with him. He's not invited to all the conferences. He has to be careful. By the way, he's also under indictment in The Hague, so he has certain challenges there. So there should be a process of saying, we can imagine that there will be a summit meeting between you and President Trump if you do these things. So the whole thing needs to be, I think this is where we get into the complexity of geopolitics and diplomacy. And I think Trump would do very well to have, some people, who have the negotiating skill and prowess, who've done this before. People like Kissinger understood this is a chess game. You don't just, make a statement like that. You have to figure out how do you put him in a position where you do the negotiation. So I think that is one of the limitations of this strategy of kind of bluster and bluff.
Israel has started phase 1 of ceasefire with the Hamas. The conversation now is about whether there will be a phase 2. The other question is about whether Netanyahu can push through on his threat of forcing a regime change in Iran, and whether Trump would back a military takeout of nuclear facilities in Iran. How do you see the situation in West Asia play out, and what do you think is actually going on in Trump's mind?
So the first thing to say is it's really important to understand that the Middle East has been reshaped. It's a fundamentally new landscape now. And that's not so much because of what has happened in Gaza. Let's leave that aside for a moment. And I understand people have very strong views about the humanitarian catastrophe that is Gaza. But put that aside for a minute, because it doesn't have that much geopolitical significance. What Israel did in the north, the destruction of Hezbollah, the destruction of Iran's air defenses, total destruction, all of that then resulted in the collapse of Assad's government, in part because, after all, who was propping up Assad? It was the Iranians and the Russians. Has created a completely new Middle East. The Middle East for 15 years has been dominated by this struggle between Iran and its proxies, Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and Israel and the Gulf Arabs on the other side. Those forces, Israel and the Gulf Arabs, are now totally dominant. Iran is on the back foot. It is much weaker.
Why was Iran found to be so weak in the battlefield? Why all the proxies that they built up, which was supposed to be their great strength, why did they just fall apart like a pack of cards?
I think two things. One, we didn't realize the degree to which the Syrian civil war, I think, sapped an enormous amount of the strength of the Hezbollah militias, the Iranian militias. There's a lot of money and people that went to fight to prop up the Assad government. And remember, that took almost 10 years, so it's a very... The second, I think, is a very useful reminder for us. Whenever we look at these kind of regimes, dictatorships, theocracies, closed, repressive, they tend to be much less effective on the ground than you realize. That they're often corrupt, they often have problems motivating people. So Hezbollah started out as this lean, mean fighting machine from the 1980s. Now it had become one of the corrupt, political parties in Lebanon. Iran itself has become a very corrupt, dysfunctional regime. So I think that there's a lesson there that, we sometimes think of these adversaries as 10 feet tall. Think about how everyone talked about Saddam Hussein and his nuclear weapons, or even the Soviet Union in the old days. There's the reality about democracies, and this is very true of India, is everybody's always criticizing. So everyone it's like we wash our dirty laundry in public. But there's a hidden strength in that resilience and flexibility.
Can there be regime change in Iran? Are the circumstances apt? If Netanyahu pushes, will Trump back a military attack on nuclear facilities? What's your reading of what's happening inside?
I don't think so. I think that the Israelis have done so much damage. They now know that Iran is almost naked and vulnerable. They could go in at any point. They could destroy more. But if they were to take that final step of really trying to absolutely have this kind of, you need a major strike, because a lot of the nuclear facilities are buried deep. You then need to go into the military cantonments where the IRGC, the Republican, not the Republican Guard, the Revolutionary Guards are. That, then you create a huge. I mean, what we have seen about the Middle East is regime change in the Middle East can spiral in very many directions, and in many ways that are not predictable. I'm not sure that the Israelis, that there's any great advantage to them in doing that. Who knows what regime would replace the
But is
the
Netanyahu
mullahs.
thinking the same way? For him, it's the greatest victory. He goes down as Israel's greatest leader ever.
If
fully
it all
redeemed.
goes well,
Sure.
Bibi Netanyahu is more cautious than people realize. When after the October 7th attack, he went after Gaza in a big way, but the IDF, the Israeli military, had actually wanted to go north and deal with Hezbollah. They said, let's take this opportunity. He didn't want to do it. It took him a while to get convinced that this was the right moment. So I think he's calculating, he's cautious. He may want to look. He's right now, frankly, in a powerful position, even domestically. He's destroyed Hamas, he's destroyed Hezbollah, he's weakened Iran, Assad is gone, all on his watch. That's a pretty impressive position to be in.
Let's speak for a moment about relations between India and the United States. Largely, there's been bipartisan support. There have been some bumps towards the end on some legal cases, on some targeted supposed assassination attempts in the United States. But how do you see Modi and Trump and India and the United States play out over the next 4 years? Is Trump going to insist that Modi and India back America more and take America's side more openly and firmly than it has in the past?
I don't think so. I think on this one, there will be more continuity than people might expect, because we saw that in Trump 1. The truth is, at this point, India and the US's relationship is beyond personalities. It has essentially become a structural, strategic alliance in which both countries recognize there are deep benefits to maintaining and deepening the cooperation. There are going to be problems; those are dealt with in a fairly, in a diplomatic way. I suspect that what you're going to see with Trump is very, very strong geopolitical alliance. He does have a few things that he cares about, which is, sometimes around the H-1Bs, and India is also a very protectionist country. So he may push those issues, but I don't think he cares as much because India is not a big enough economic player that it affects the American economy, the fact that India is protectionist. And Trump doesn't particularly care about free trade. He just wants a good deal between the United States and India. So if India is protectionist and has barriers to he doesn't care. His concern about Canada and the EU, it's all just about America. And you're not letting American goods in the same terms as. So there may be a little bit of push there. I actually think it would be good for India to open up its borders more. One of the reasons India hasn't been able to move as fast in manufacturing is because it has many protectionist barriers. Because a lot of what you manufacture these days, you're assembling, and the intermediate goods that you bring in have very high tariffs. So the cost of manufacturing in India is too high. If Trump's pressure makes India open up a little bit, it's good for India.